Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover Disc Face Off, where we check out a few magazines every month to see who produced the best disc, with today covering December of 1991. And in this festive wrap-up we have Amiga Action, Amiga Power, and See You Amiga. Fight! First up is Amiga Action issue 27, who continued to provide 2 discs and also not to provide any menu whatsoever. The first demo is Another World, which opens up with a slightly different logo to what we would see in the final game, but then surprisingly goes on to the full intro sequence. Now this is identical to the final game as far as I can make it out. And while this intro is amazing and all, unfortunately you cannot skip it. Now this will be far more annoying as we'll see in a minute. But for you lot, we can just jump cut straight to the gameplay. And, well, that didn't take very long there, did it? No sniggering at the back there, please. That damn slug on the ceiling should not have been that far over already. So, let's go again, shall we? And, wait, what? I have to sit through that entire intro again? Let's check the magazine, and, yep, each time you die, you have to watch the whole intro again. And while it's great and all, you really just want to get on to playing the game again, and this is a bit of a pain having to sit through it. But I did so, and we're on to a second game, and this is going much better. This is definitely a demo that I would have taken up a whole bunch of time playing on back in the day, as I remember spending ages trying to work out how to beat this level when I was first introduced to it. Though there is a good chance I might have given up on the demo if I had to sit and watch that intro each time. And we go from a technically advanced game to, well, this, Baby Joe. A platformer which you play as a baby and, well, is it me or is this just a bit slow and chuggy? Baby Joe himself is nicely animated, and has a bunch of unique animations for his various actions as well as the numerous ways that he can die, but it really doesn't make up for a slightly boring gameplay. By default, you don't really have any defense. You just have to avoid everything. And when you do get a rattle, it's very limited in ammo, and it's got quite the arc on it, so hitting anything is a real chore. It also took me way too long to be able to grab hold of this balloon. For some reason that was really awkward. This game is a definite pass from me. It's nice enough looking and all, but it's not great fun to play. So it's time to get on to the next disc, and first up is Heimdall and the Axe Throwing Minigame. This was one of a number of minigames in the full game that was used to help you spec out your team. The goal is simple enough. You've got to throw an axe to cut the hair. The more hair you cut, the better you are, and thus the better your team. Most misses aren't really a problem, but it does use up one of the 10 axes that you have. But there is one miss that has its own special animation. Whoops! It's a fun demo, but it really doesn't show off much of the game, or even any of the core gameplay. Now outside of the actual game, which is actually quite a lot of fun, this minigame is probably most well remembered for showing up in The Games Master.
It's taken from a game called Heimdall, and is set in the drunken atmosphere of a Viking tavern. You have 2 minutes in which to throw an unlimited number of axes to sever the maiden's 8 blades and save her from the bawdy Vikings.
Which aired just a month or two after this issue, so there's a good possibility they were playing the very same demo on the show. And finally we come on to Siege Master. Well, that is if you happen to have a very particular Amiga, which was an Amiga 500 with a 1.2 kickstart and only half a megabyte of RAM. If any of those are different, then instead of getting the game, you'll be seeing this. This is pretty bad, as Kickstart 1.3 was far more popular than 1.2. Those were really just the first issue machines, and quite a few people were upgrading to 1 megabyte of RAM. So can you imagine a full 1/4 of the demos on this magazine might not have been able to run on most people's machines. This is mostly due to the fact that yet again they are using an action replay save state for the demo. But leaving that behind, let's check out the game itself, and we have a bit of an interesting, if slow game here. You control these 3 cloned heroes, and right at the beginning you are given a quest that you have to go and kill some wolves and get their fangs. So once you've worked out the interface, you get to direct your men up north, where you will eventually find said wolves. At this point you might want to rearrange your clone troopers, as you want to put your swordmen up front, and then try and fire your arrows from the back. Now I'm assuming that just having your sword guys next to the wolves actually attacks them, as they do have a bit of an animation and you do occasionally get this screen, which I think looks like a summary, or is telling me what the action is going to do. I'm not too sure. And after a bit of a protracted fight, I ended up with just 1 person left, and I'm ordered to go find some castle. Now this game actually does show some promise, but I feel it needs to be much faster to actually be fun. But I don't think that happened, as in this very issue they actually reviewed the game, and they gave it a middling score. But then the game itself never actually got released. For some reason, it just upped and vanished, which is a bit of a shame, as I could have seen me playing it if they actually improved it. So let's move on to Amiga Power Issue 8. And you see that Cartoon Classics box on the cover? Well, that was what I got that very Christmas with our Amiga 500 Plus. But let's get onto the games instead, as there's 2 commercial demos as well as 2 PD titles, all on a single disc. And after the last magazine having no menus, this one actually has 2 separate ones that you can choose from. You have this nice graphical one, and this simple text-based one. And after testing both out, go for that text-based one. It's so much faster to load and get you into the game. The first demo is Cisco Heat, which is a racing title based on an arcade game that I've never played, so I can't really comment on how well it stacks up against the original. But I can say this feels a little bit slower than the big racer of the time, Lotus. Now this might be due to it being an early demo, because when I checked out the reviews, they actually said the game seemed to run quite quickly. The goal, as you might expect from a racing title, is just to make it to the end goal, and you have to do that within a very tight time limit. And of course, you have to do all this while avoiding the traffic, as well as the other police cars that are on the road. You also have lots of other obstacles and jumps to deal with as well. Now the party piece of this is when you have to go left or right, as you'll have to make these 90-degree turns. These actually look quite cool, but are a little bit clunky to control, as you're not quite sure where your car is going to end up. And speaking of controls, it's push up to drive, and fire gives you this almost pointless horn, and if you hit the spacebar then you can go between your low and high gear. Though low gear really isn't as useful as you might expect, as you hit its top speed very quickly, and being in high gear when you need to be in low doesn't really impact you as much as you might expect. It's not a bad racer, and I did play it enough to actually win the first level, but with Lotus 1 and 2 around, I doubt I really would have given this much time. Hopefully I'm not going to make a right tit of myself, as it's Elvira, the arcade game next, which has some of that classic Flare style music. In this game we actually play as the Mistress of the Dark, as we jump, float and fire our way around this huge level. And that's not the only huge thing around here, as check out the animation count on that main sprite. It really is quite detailed. The goal, I assume, is to make it to the end of the level. I say assume as this is a slightly broken game. The collision detection doesn't always work, with you being able to stand in the middle of walkways and getting slightly stuck on some of the walls. From what I've gathered, you need to go around collecting various keys that will unlock the doors that will allow you to move on. Where those keys are and which doors they unlock, well, that's for you to work out. This is quite clearly an early build of the game, due to the aforementioned bugs, but also the fact that the magic doesn't seem to work, or at least it did absolutely nothing for me. That and the weapons are also meant to upgrade when you collect more of them, which again doesn't happen. Which is a bit of a shame, as trying to hit some of those baddies can be quite difficult when you've only got the single item, because again, you've got a bit of the weird arc, where having 3 projectiles would make it a lot simpler. And on the subject of things to hit, those monsters have this annoying habit of just constantly spawning on from the side of the screen. It's not a mechanic I'm a particularly big fan of. I'd rather monsters be set in the level, and even if they just respawn when you move past them, it's still better than them just flying on constantly. But overall, it's actually quite an interesting demo, as they're making great use of the dual planes of the Amiga to do some nice backgrounds. And oh dear, I made a right boob of it by getting myself stuck in this door. So let's check out the PD games, and we have Welltrix, which is a clone of the official sequel to Tetris, Welltris. So it wasn't just the original that got cloned all the time, its sequels got that treatment as well. And in this game you have to guide bricks into the well at the bottom from the 4 different sides. Pushing up on the controller will rotate it around, left and right will move it around the wall, and pressing down will slam it down hard. Now this does take a little bit to get used to, particularly when you're moving around the walls, as what you think should move it down doesn't always align with what you're seeing. You can clear lines in either direction, and when you do so, bricks will then move into the centre of the well. This is useful, as if you leave a bit of a brick on the wall, then it'll actually lock it out from your use for up to 3 turns. It's definitely an interesting take on Tetris, and it is much harder, but I don't think it's quite as classic as the original game. The other PD title is Cap Othello, which is also known as Reversi. It's one of those simple but tricky games that have been cloned endlessly through the years. You have to place tiles into the grid in a way that will flip the other players, and in this instance I'm playing against the computer, who actually does a decent job. Or possibly I play really badly, you take your pick. This is pretty much a no-frills desktop game, so you could just copy it over to your regular workbench setup and play it there if you wanted to. It's just one of those games that's really difficult to talk about, seeing how simple it is. So I feel it's time we moved on to the final magazine, CU Amiga, which comes with 2 floppy disks, but the special one is oh so special. So let's take a very quick look at the first, which comes with a word processor, some clip art, as well as a picture of the month. As we've seen before, CU Amiga likes to do these things, which is this very snazzy Terminator 2 image. It also has 2 musics of the month, which we will listen to when we check out the second disc, as it's this 21 PD games. That's right, it's a public domain feast. And with so many of them not having music or sound effects, let's use that musics of the month so it's not too quiet. All of them are accessed from this very simple text menu that has the game split into various categories. And seeing there are so many of them, I might only show some very briefly, as they are quite simple. To start with, we have 5 classic board games, with the first being Chinese Checkers, a game that I've seen but never really played. But it looks like the standard fare of you having to move, then jump over the other player's pieces. The best bit here is you can just set each colour to be played by the AI, and then you can just let them go. The second game should need no introduction at all, as it's Peg Puzzle, aka Towers of Hanoi. The basics, if you don't know, is that you have to move the entire tower from one peg to the other. The trick is you can only place a disc on an empty peg or on top of a larger disc. It's a simple but well enough done game. Third is Backgammon, a game I know absolutely nothing about. Honestly, I have no idea. I know it's been used in various movies and the like, but how you actually play it, not a clue. I tried clicking around, got nowhere, and I didn't want to learn how to play it, so let's move on. The fourth game was actually quite interesting, as it's Go Moku, which is a game that you place pieces on a board, typically a Go board and its pieces, and the goal is to try and place them in such a way you get 5 in a row. This can be horizontally, diagonally, or vertically, and it even comes with an AI opponent, who won every single game that we played. This isn't something I'd played before, but you know what, I found it a lot of fun, and will probably go back to it again. And so the final game of this category is Amiga Q, aka Peg Solitaire, or the Peg game if you will. Again, a very popular title to clone, and this one is fine enough. It's no looker, but it works well. And if you've seen any one of these type of games, then you've seen this version, as it is quite basic. This leads us on to the Modern Masterpiece category, and first up is Kamikaze Chess, which isn't a variation I've played before. And after looking up the rules online, it seems that this one is also a little different from them as well. The goal is to lose all your pieces, and this is done by placing them in positions where they have to be taken by the opponent. As one of the rules is that if you can take a piece, you must take a piece. As I wasn't too sure of the rules when I first played it, I just set the AI against itself, and it was actually quite fun to watch. All the way up until the end, that is, as at that point they just stalemated each other and it just wouldn't finish. The next game is Amiga-stration, a play on concentration, which is a memory game. You flip 2 cards, if they match, they're locked. Your goal is to try and find all the pairs in the deck. It's a staple for mini-games all across gaming, and has shown up in all sorts of titles over the years, so you've probably seen a variation of this game more than once before. This is actually a decent enough version, as you can have multiple players, you can change the size of the deck, and it has lots of unique artwork, which is quite fun. We now come to an interesting little title, 3D Tic-Tac-Toe, aka Noughts and Crosses. And as you might imagine, this is played across all 4 boards, and you have to make up a line of 4 in any direction, even across the boards, especially across the boards. And it can be in all sorts of weird and random directions, and it can really mess with your brain as well, as it really does ramp up the complexity. And the AI is actually quite good at getting the upper hand on you as well. This is another game I could see me playing quite a bit of, even if it is one of the more basic looking games in the collection. The next game looks as if it's had a little more effort put into it at least, but it's another one that shouldn't need much explaining, as it's Up and Down, aka Connect 4. You make lines of 4 with your discs and you win. The provided AI isn't all that great, so don't expect too much of a challenge, but it's fine enough for what it is. And the last for this group is Dilemma, one of the few games that actually got a title screen and sound effects, though part of you will wish that it didn't have that. This is a classic puzzle game in which you have to try and fill the square using the parts provided. You can rotate, flip and mirror the parts before trying to place them on the grid. This is also timed, and if the time runs out then you lose a life, so you have to be quite quick. I'm not sure how many levels are included, but it does hint that there are quite a few, so this would keep you going for quite some time. And at the midway point, we're now at the Arcade Arena group, which starts with a classic arcade game, Missile Command. And this is a damn fine version of it. It's fast and smooth, and looks really quite crisp. The goal, as always, is to shoot down the missiles that are trying to destroy your cities. You play as that grey building in the middle, and those dots represent your stock of interceptors, which will be depleted as well if a missile hits it. But if it hits a city, then the explosion is quite cool, and it does mean you lose a life, so you have to be very careful. It also has this extra foe that I don't recall being in other versions, but I could be wrong, and it's this thing that doesn't have a trail, and they can only be taken out if you actually hit them directly with an explosion. If they fall into the side of one, then they'll actually be pushed back rather than exploding, like the other missiles. They also seem to be guided, so they can be a real pain to deal with. But it's nice to see them expanding on the game, or at least expanding on it in a way that I can't remember. as the next game is Amoeba Invaders. And I'm not entirely sure why they bothered to give this another name, as this is very clearly a clone of Space Invaders, all the way down to the artwork. And as far as I'm aware, they didn't add anything to it as well. It's your standard Space Invaders game, down to the spaceship that you can shoot as well. It's fast enough and nicely done, but it doesn't really bring anything new, which is also the same for the next game, Cosmoroids, which is a very basic clone of Asteroids. And it's not the best clone you'll see either, as the ship's movement is way too fast, which makes it a real pain trying to fly it around and avoid those other asteroids. And pressing down on the joystick doesn't teleport you, it seems to do nothing, so instead you have to hit the spacebar. So even discounting the amazing Stardust, there are actually far better versions of asteroids on the Amiga to play instead. And this leads us on to the last of this group, Bally 3, which might be in German, but you don't need to read it to be able to work out this game, as it's a variation on Quicks, in which you have to move out from the side of the screen to try and draw shapes in the middle. These will then fill up that space, and if you keep at it, then you'll eventually hit the goal of 75% of the screen being filled. I've played a few versions of Quicks over the years, and this one does feel a little bit different, as the sparks that you trap inside one of your shapes don't die. Instead they live on that side, which means you have to be very careful while moving around, as you can move freely in the cleared space, but they are also there ready to get you. And if you hang around too long, then you'll also get an evil spark that'll come straight for you and try to get you very quickly. And with that, we've come on to the last group, the Variety Vanguard, with a whopping 7 games. And to start with, we have Deluxe Hamburger, a game that outside of some funny artwork is just meh. It's a game that could have been done better in the shoot 'em up construction kit. Even as a joke game, this really should not have been included. So next up we have Tumbling Tots, and yes, that are babies being thrown out of a building, and yes, that is also me failing to save them, as it took me a little while to work out the controls, as this requires you to use the number pad, so you Amiga 600 owners, you better look elsewhere. 4 and 6 moves you left and right, and the numbers 1, 2, 3 will directly move you to the corresponding space. Once you get the hang of the controls, it's actually pretty fine. But it really needed to get a better handle on its difficulty ramp, as it just gets a bit boring on those lower levels, and then suddenly you'll get 2 in a row, and then it's just back to the single one. Now this is the opposite to Egyptian Run, a simple looking game that you have to drive your jeep across the desert, all while avoiding the pyramids, which there are far more of than I recall. This game actually ramps up quite quickly, and in doing so it is actually quite a bit of fun. And initially, I was actually trying to avoid those white things, as I was thinking they were also traps. Turns out, they're ramps, which is actually quite fun. They can help you out, or they might just send you straight into the side of a pyramid. And from a game from a 16-year-old, it's not actually all that bad really. And that skull when you die, that's a nice touch. Mirror Wars is next, and it's a bit of an odd game, as it's for 1 or 2 players. And you have to fire balls into that bit in the middle, the mirror maze. Now these balls might make it through and then come out the other side, or bounce around and then come straight back out, up at you. This is another game that has AI, and to be honest, it took itself out far more often than I did. Actually, to be honest, I took myself out more often than it did as well. It's one of those games that I think looks and sounds better on paper than it actually does in practice, but it is quite cool that they tried something different. Same with Match Patch, which as we can see looks a little bit like Bubble Bubble, but you can't just randomly shoot the creatures in the level. Instead, you have to fall down one of those holes at the bottom to select the right weapon for each of the baddie types. And when you do that, you can then take them out. And if you use the wrong type on a baddie, you'll end up changing what they are. Never to what you need them to be, but just to one of the other types. As a game concept, it's actually better done than some of the commercial games that we've seen previously. And I think if they took the time to really polish it up and sort out some of the controls which could be a little bit fiddly, they could have had a really solid game on their hands. But even without that, I did end up playing it for quite a while. The 20th game on this disc is Circuit War, which I'd like to say I played a lot of, but to be honest, I was finding it hard to work out what it is you were meant to do. Now I know you have to place wires on the grid, and then you can place other circuits on the wires that you can use to attack the other players, but I never managed to get quite that far enough to work out how to do all that. This would be one that I would definitely load up again, and then read the provided help docs, as I think this could be a really interesting little game, as it definitely seems like there's a lot of depth to it. But it also seems that you really have to read up on how to play it first. You can't just dive straight in and expect to know what you're doing. Though I will say it does have a bit of an annoying habit, that when it's displaying a message on the screen, you can't do any input, which really does slow the whole thing down. And finally, we come on to the last game, Steps. A relatively simple game where you have to get your ball from the bottom of the screen to the top. To start with, you have to select your level, and then you have to use the numbers again to select where you want the ball to start. Why they couldn't just let you click on the grid, I'm not entirely sure, but once you get over that, it's relatively straightforward. And then you can move your ball around the grid 1 steps at a time. And each time you do that, the arrow blocks will also move. Get hit by one and it's game over, so you have to be on the lookout every time you make a steps. It's a fun if limited puzzle game, as there wasn't a huge number of levels, but I can see them taking a little while to complete. And there we have it, the month of December done. And which magazines had the best toys in their Christmas crackers? Well, in third place I feel it has to go to Amiga Action, as while it had some decent games, they were either very short or had something annoying about the demo themselves. Second place goes to Amiga Power. It had the best demo with Elvira, but it was not enough to bring home the gold. So in first place is a surprise with CU Amiga, mostly because I could spend way more time on those PD games than any of the previous demos. So until next time, I was the Goldfish. That ranking might prove to be controversial, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching Cover Disc Face Off. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you should be able to find 2 other videos on the screen right now. Or you might even want to subscribe or even ring that bell icon, because that's what I've been told that you need to do. So until next time, thank you and goodbye.